Hey folks, this is Picohan on the North American server, and this is the Tier 7 French battleship Lyon. The map is Haven. It's a domination battle, and a shout out to Bremen in the Gauge and Skogan in the Scharnhorst. Annoyingly, this is a Tier 9 game, which should be pretty rare for Tier 7s, but recently I've seen a lot of them, which is, like I said, annoying. That's okay because the Lyon is a very strong ship and up tiers generally pretty well. My take on this is it's basically the Fuso, but better tier for tier. It's a shotgun in the sense that you get a lot of small caliber guns, but whereas the Fuso gets 12, the Lyon gets 16. The Lyon's guns are slightly smaller, and correspondingly they have slightly less alpha, slightly less pen, and so on and so forth, but the shell arcs are flatter, so in some ways it's a little bit easier to hit the target. The accuracy is a little bit worse on the Lyon, but the sigma of the two ships is the same. I believe it's 1.5. What the Lyon really has an edge in is that it's faster by a couple knots, it's more maneuverable, and it actually has pretty good AA. The Lyon also has a better fire chance, even though it's only by 1%. It's 26 compared to the Fuso's 25. But this makes it like you can use it more aggressively than you would on the Fuso. The Fuso's HE is kind of a last ditch when you can't do damage with the AP. The Lyons can be more useful in more situations. So, in this game, we're going to the southwest flank, and the Fletcher's an idiot, and he gets himself killed in the first 3 minutes. So this is really bad, considering he was the top tier destroyer in a domination match. Typically, both in domination and standard, I like going to the southwest flank more than the northeast flank because the teams tend to go there and you have a better chance of trying to resist push in the southwest, whereas in the northeast you probably have to push, which is of course harder. I loaded HE here before I saw anything, and it's like, I don't think there's a right answer per se. You'll notice the first thing I saw was the bow and Gneisenau, so HE was good, but then the Scharnhorst was broadside, AP might have been better. Either way, as we get closer to the flank, I did switch to AP. Here, I'm trying to set up for a kite if they try to come down the west flank. This area is a good place to camp in general for battleships and cruisers because you've got a lot of things blocking line of sight, but also a lot of cracks that you can shoot through without taking much return fire. Since it looks like we are turning this flank back, they're not going to push, so I'm going to try to move a little bit further along. On the subject of kiting, the turret arrangement on the Lyon is basically AQXY, which means there's one turret in the front, one in the middle, and two in the back. That means that the rearward facing firepower is much better than going forward. so it kites better than it pushes. The firing angles are also not bad. Maybe not as good as something like the Hood, but much better than the Normandy. And I feel that it's comparable to the Fuso, which also has decent firing angles. Haven't really landed any good salvos at this point, but if you look at the mini-map, it looks like the enemy flank is wrapping around clockwise for another push, so I want to turn around and once again get into that kiting position near those islands. I took a shot at the Haida since we're in a bad situation with our destroyers, but unfortunately we don't land anything there either. It does look like some of these guys want to push through that gap toward the cap, so once I turn around, I'm of course going to slow down and try to hold a position that I like. So I'm camping a lot in the early game here because the imperative to push is not really strong yet. Despite the early death of our Fletcher, none of the caps have been taken, and we're trading fairly evenly. Bremen, in fact, takes out the enemy Chengmu. Our Charles dies, but now we're capping C, and we could easily take out another ship to even the count again. Some people might advocate, like, oh, you should always push aggressively, and if you're a really good player, you might be able to make that work. But for most people, it's a lot of times better to play it safe, and patience is a virtue, and you see that Star Horse went down, and now we're up on points and capping C. But their destroyer is finally in B as well. In the meantime, I've been trying to take opportunistic shots at things that are going broadside over there, but now the enemy flank is retreating a lot, and as quickly as the game tipped into our favor, it tipped back when Bremen died. So now they've got their destroyer in B, we're down on ships and points, and we're not capping C anymore. So it's at this point that me and Skogan decide that we should push, but we're going to make a very specific push. We know that it's probably the Haida in A, and the rest of this team is pretty far back, so we think between the two of us we should almost certainly be able to take him, and that'll give us back the points, the ships, and potentially the cap. And as I come around the corner, this is just a little bit unfortunate. The Haida only has these 4 torps, and he just happened to put them here, and I just happened to not turn in hard enough at that time and ate one. And that's very unfortunate. The Haida smoked himself. I don't know when he did, but I feel like this was actually a bad thing for him because he got out too late. And I kinda suspect it's because he didn't see us coming. So 4 overpens were all we needed to kill him. If you're capping undetected, you don't want to smoke, because you want to see what's coming so you can get out if you need to. If you're almost about to cap it and someone might detect you just then, maybe you smoke so you can finish the cap, but otherwise, not a good idea. And speaking of bad ideas, now that we took out the Haida, we're kind of in a crossfire though we are taking the cap. Luckily, the terrain is just such that we can drop off for a little bit, finish the cap, and now I'm immediately going to start at least turning the ship around, if not getting out of here. Along the way, this buffalo shows up, and he gives a nice broadside. We missed the first shot, but the second salvo with the back guns lands us 2 citadels, which is really nice. And just for the record, you can see the small turning radius of the Lyon at work here. Some ships might not have been able to make that turn. Neptune pops up briefly, and I tried to take a pot shot, but I had to go over that island, and we just got an overpen. It's whatever. This corner is actually a pretty good spot to work on enemies to the west of this big island, but since it looks like those guys are really far back and the east side is pushing, we're going to go around and work on the guys in the east, even though it's a little bit more open water. Though there is plenty of room to kite in the south if need be. So I was thinking of aiming at the buffalo and trying to take him out, because he only had 1,000 hit points, but the North Carolina looked fairly broad, so I decided to take the shot, assuming that our friendlies would take out the buffalo, which they don't. So in hindsight, maybe I should have put 2 guns on the buffalo and 2 on the North Carolina, because the North Carolina salvo wasn't that good. As soon as I saw the priority target indicator go to 1, I slowed down and angled more, because I assumed it was the North Carolina shooting at me, but then we saw him shoot elsewhere, so I softened the angle a bit and took the shot, which, so-so again. The NC turns away, and I think he actually beaches himself up there, but I don't quite want to turn in and chase him yet, because I don't know where the Neptune is. If he surprises us up close, it can be really bad, but it looks like he's running away, and I'm not the first ship here anyways, so I think we can turn around again. Wanted to take a shot at the NC. Islands were in the way, so we're going to look at the Donskoy instead. This is not a good shot, but we're just using the guns on cooldown here. The Donskoy sets us on fire, and I'm going to do a preemptive heal here, which means I'll be healing as the fire is burning, so I can get to the next heal faster. In this situation, since he's so far away, you could argue for just damage conning 1 fire, but I generally don't like to do that, and I would rather use the heals instead. So the Neptune comes back for more. At first, I held the shot to see if he would give a better angle, but after waiting a couple seconds, it doesn't look like it, so I went ahead and fired. Against the British light cruisers, you can overmatch pretty much everything, so I kind of hope that with the 16 shells I could get a front citadel or something, but that doesn't look like it's going to be the case. Now, since it looks like the enemy wants to come down this flank, it's a perfect time to slow down, maintain a good angle, and let them come to us. Whether you should hold fire waiting for a better angle is always kind of debatable to me, because you just never know. In this case, in retrospect, I felt like it was justified, because the Neptune never really gave a good angle until he died, and since we fired, our Nyx cooldown came up and we could finish him off. And we're going to finish off the North Carolina with the other half of that broadside as well. So I switched to HE after killing the North Carolina, because the next 2 targets, the Gneisenau and the Nagato, are A, far away, and B, angled pretty much straight at us. We have a choice here between the lower health Gneiss now who's on fire and the higher health Nagato who's not on fire. I shot at the lower health Gneiss now who was on fire, but in retrospect, maybe setting a fire on the Nagato would have been better. Now, I'm backing up toward the Gneiss now and the Nagato because they're slowing down, and I want to close the distance. Now, I could go forward and up the west flank, but that would get rid of the crossfire I'm creating with my team over there, and the islands could block my cooldowns. Alternatively, I could turn around and head east, but that would mean one pair of turrets would have to turn around, and that would also be putting some guns out of action for some time. So I decided I would rather close distance slower and keep the guns firing than do otherwise. Furthermore, especially when you have the upper hand, and since the push against the Haida, we have been up in ships and points, it's generally safer, not necessarily better, but safer to reverse into the enemy. Now, we could have gone to AP somewhere in the last couple salvos, but we did end up burning down the Gneiss now, and the HE does have some synergy with the Atlanta and Seattle, who are also shooting at these guys. I did finally go to AP, but not before we got a double fire on the Nagato. Unfortunately, he's going to take too much damage too quickly for us to burn him down. So the last guy on this side, the Donskoy, looks like it's going to be a hard shot, but he turns in just as our cooldown comes up and we take the shot. Like I said, this is still a hard shot, but thanks to the 16 shells, one will make it in, and we get the Confederate and the Kraken. And that's pretty much it for this game. The Fiji is not going to show himself, so we're going to go to the results screen. 131,000 damage with 5 kills. Those are pretty good numbers. Not amazing, but this was a tier 9 game. The 2200 base XP, also pretty good, but not amazing, since most of our damage was on same tier ships. Shot mostly AP, but as you saw, there's some HE mixed in there. Usually you want to use the HE against things like bow on North Carolinas or Iowas. In this case it went to same tier ships, but it's whatever.